Good morning. And I want to say it's such a privilege to be here this morning. And I'm saying this because I really believe that the future of learning is with you, the future of lifelong, life-wide learning. We used to learn to do the work, and now suddenly learning has become the work. And the only way that people are going to accept that one day a robot may steal their job is if they have the confidence and the skills to create or look for a new one. But we also need to think harder about, now I'm trying to get my clicker to work. Excuse me, can someone help me? This is about technology. Yeah, now it works. We need to think harder how we develop the right skills. We need to think harder how we extract good value from the skills that people have and how we build effective skills systems that cover the life course of people. And the one thing I don't need to explain to you is how important it is, not just for the economic success of people. We see a strong relationship between the skills of people and the earnings and employment. That's very well known, but we also see very important social outcomes related to skills that are very important for the future of our societies. But at the same time, the world keeps changing very fast. You know, about a decade ago, we got the world's knowledge into our fingertips. And from that moment, it didn't just matter what you know. Now, Google knows everything. It mattered what you can do with what you know. And that was not the end of the story. The virtual world and the real world became somehow integrated, and suddenly we were all connected. And while some things became a lot easier and simpler for us, a lot of things that we took for granted and that were actually quite simple became a lot more complicated. If you think about something like literacy in the past was about extracting knowledge from books that someone else had written for you. It's a fairly straightforward task. And when you didn't know the answer to a question, you could look it up and you could trust the answer to be true. Today, you look up something on Google and you find 20,000 answers to your question, and nobody tells you what's right and what's wrong. Literacy is suddenly about navigating ambiguity, managing complex information. And I just said how great it is that everybody is connected, but actually, the kind of media, social media that are around us connect you more likely with people who are like you, who think like you, who believe in the same things, who look like you. It's actually become much harder for people to embrace the diversity in views, opinions, and that is around us. So actually, some things have become really, really hard for us. And if you want some data on this, 2/3 of young Brits say they feel really, really bad if they are not connected. Being connected has become like drinking water, breathing air. The virtual world is becoming the real world for people. So let's think about how we can develop the right skills, and that has a lot to do with anticipating where the future is going to be. It no longer works to learn once for a lifetime. The future is changing continuously, and it's basically about moving from stacking up qualifications up front in your life to this kind of lifelong, life-wide learning. Some countries are already very, very far advanced on this path, and I think you provide the right framework for this. Let's think about a bit the future of education, the future of skills. Think about the impact of digitalization. Digitalization has been incredibly democratizing. Everybody can contribute, participate, but it's also concentrating power at a rate that we have never seen before. And that's also true for education these days. It's incredibly particularizing. The smallest voice can be heard anywhere in the world. Now, we know that every day. We see that every day. But it's also incredibly homogenizing, squashing individuality, cultural uniqueness. Digitalization is incredibly empowering. If you look at the largest companies these days that were created in the last decade, they were all created with an idea. They had the product before they had the money and the resources. They didn't start with a big factory. They started with an idea. But also we know that digitalization can be incredibly disempowering. When we start to trust algorithms and the decisions of algorithms more than we trust ourselves or our neighbors. And where you end up on that graph has a lot to do with your capacity to learn and upgrade your skills. Let's look at the effects of digitalization in a little bit more detail. Now, one of the things that we see is that routine tasks are disappearing. That's a very clear picture. Robots are taking over whole factories. But we also see that technology-intensive tasks are rapidly rising. And you put the two things together, you get a sense of where the future of work, the future of skills really, really lies. When you think about exposure, it affects some people a lot more than others. Now, you're much safer these days if you are a technician than you are a machine operator. We know that sort of the kind of skill base that you have in your occupational space have a huge influence on the volatility of your future on this. The one thing I wanted to highlight here, which I find really important, is that people are often afraid of the digital workplace in the sense, it puts people at risk. But one of the things that we actually see, if you work in a very digitalized, highly digitalized workplace, you are much more likely to keep up to date, to become and remain a good problem solver. If you end up in a kind of least digital workplace, you are much more likely to lose your problem-solving skills that you had initially after graduating. So actually, digitalization is a great way to keep people up to date. Now, it's also something that makes people to read more, to do more writing, to do more numeracy at work. Now, those skills are highly related to the nature of our workplace. And interestingly, it also makes us more likely to learn from our coworkers, to learn by doing, to keeping up to date. So in a way, the digital workplace is a counterpart of the FE colleges these days. Integrating these two worlds, the world of learning and the world of work, is where the future lies, and that is to do with these kinds of digital workplaces. The last point I want to add to this is that it's basically about the global value chains around us. And the more interconnected our economies become, the less money we make in the kind of production stage, and the more money we're going to make in the pre-production stage, the R&D, the design phases, and then the post-production, the service and the marketing of things. So that's exactly also one of the things that when we design the future of learning, we need to keep in mind. And the more integrated economies become, the more U-shaped that curve really becomes. Let's see how well we are prepared for this. One of the things that we did is we assessed the digital problem-solving skills of adults. And these were not abstract, programming skills, but really very practical capacities of people to use digital technologies. And you can see, basically, when you look among older workers, 55 to 65-year-olds, doesn't look very good. Now, there are a lot of skill shortages in these kinds of technology. The UK is actually well positioned, at least better positioned than many other countries, but you still only talk about 1 in 5 older workers who are prepared for the flat world in which we live today. Not tomorrow, this is today's reality. And now you're going to tell me, well, that's all solved. Young people are digital natives. They have all of those kinds of skills from, birth. But actually, when you look at 16 or 24-year-olds, yeah, the picture does look better. But you still talk about, just 40% of the people prepared for the world in which we live today. And actually, while the UK used to be at the top of the league, in the older generation, in the younger generation, the UK is more at the bottom of the league. And not because things got worse, absolutely not, but because things got so much faster elsewhere in the world. If you look to Singapore, for example, very few people in the old generation have the skills to contribute to the flat world. But actually, among young people, it's 2/3. That is possible, and that is about investing in the skills of people continuously across the life cycle of people. That brings me to the second point. How do we foster learning through our lives? And the learning is actually the easy part. What is much harder for all of us is to unlearn and relearn when the context changes. To give up some of our habits, the kind of things that we got used to, our ways of thinking that have been very established. Being open to the novelty, being open to new types of thinking, new types of working. That is the test of truth, and that requires not just the capacity, but also the willingness to keep learning throughout life, the belief that learning is going to transform our lives. And I just want to show you one thing here that I find really important. When I look at universities in the UK, and I look at workers who are well matched to their jobs, that's the green bar, they have decent skills. But there are a lot of people in the UK who work in jobs for which they wouldn't need a higher education degree. And now some people say, well, they're just unlucky people. They got great skills, but they got a job that isn't using their skills. No? Actually, if you look at the blue bar here, what it tells you is a very different story. It tells you actually that those people that actually got a university degree but end up in jobs that don't require one actually don't have the skills. Somehow they got a badge, a degree, a credential, but actually when you look inside the package, actually the skills value isn't there. And that, I think, is one of the big dilemmas that we have. We have a lot of credentialism. We have the trust in kind of degrees and qualifications. But as soon as we look at the actual skills that people have, the picture can be very, very different. And actually, what we did in the past, building that trust in degrees, will not work in the future. Employers are becoming much, much better to figure out what skills you actually have right now, rather than trusting a degree that you've got 10, 20, 30 years ago. So this chart, I think, is a really warning signal that we're not doing so well, and we need to do better to integrate the world of work and the world of learning. If you think about the world of learning, the traditional university sector, now one of the things that we see, and this is not a picture of the UK just, we see that all around the industrialized world, that more and more people are leaving with degrees, having difficulties finding adequate jobs, and at the same time, employers are quite desperate to find the people with the skills they need. There is this growing kind of mismatch. We also see that there are plenty of people in many countries who've got a degree who don't have the skills that you would associate with this degree. And again, the UK is not alone. That is a general phenomenon, the mismatch between formal qualification and then actual skills of people. So, one of the effects that we see is actually those kinds of degrees and qualifications that exist are segmenting labor markets. They make people believe in certain currencies that actually don't have the purchasing power they suggest. But even worse, narrow, in a way, you can take England as a good example. Now, the system is heavily biased towards the traditional universities. And the entrance exams to universities actually are distorting almost all of the system basically to schools. Now, that's actually one of the risks that we currently have. We also have a very lumpy degree structure, and that discourages people from learning throughout life. If all what matters is a formal degree that you can only get in 3 years, why would I invest in something that is more granular? But it is changing. If you go to Sweden, if you go to Finland these days, learning has become very granular, very modular. People decide where they learn, what they learn, how they learn, when they learn throughout their lives. 40% of the adult workforce in Sweden is participating in sustained learning that is not just narrowly job-based, but that can be well for their next job. So this is one of the things we need to consider. Now, I don't say that university degrees are going away. They are going to be a very important currency. But we see more of employer-driven and skill-based certification all around the world, and the better technology becomes, the easier it will be for employers to actually see the skills that people have got, and to build those skill systems in a much more granular way. And I think that's actually where your market, the FE colleges, is so strong. So it's the future is about engaging employers and bringing them really into the learning system. And I know that's very, very hard to do for small enterprises, which are dominating the UK labor market. But they're good examples. If you look, for example, to Norway, small enterprises partner, and they partner with institutions. They build frameworks that can actually share the costs and complexities of apprenticeship programs. Or do you take Switzerland, where actually companies are sharing apprentices. If they are small, they work together to build those kinds of systems. There are solutions to this problem. It's also about integrating work-based learning more systematically into vocational and also technical education. And this is an area I think you could probably do more. Now, the work-based learning part is a really, really important part of the learning partner. And in one way, we think it should almost be mandatory, have a significant share of learning at the workplace. Now, it is best if it's systematic, credit-bearing, quality assured, that's very important. And also, it's something that will sustain itself financially. The costs are very different. Now, you can make a lot of money out of training an electrician as an apprentice. You lose money by training an electronics, engineer. And the reasons are very obvious. But it suggests that governments need to think much harder how they subsidize continual learning so that it works for employers, for individuals, and for everyone. Employers are also actually quite good in telling you about the evolution of skill demand. No? They're not as good as you might think in the long run, no? But they're very good in showing you how skills are being used today. What is also, in my view, really important, I say this, I think in the UK, it's important to build a sufficient degree of transversal skills into continual learning. A lot of learning in your country is very short, very job-specific, very occupationally oriented. But today, the transversal skill component is the most important part that helps people move forward. So I think this is something really to work on. And then think about, what can governments do about this? And finding the right match, ensure that the provision is aligned with the evolution of skill demand, to also ensure that there is a high degree of quality in the delivery. Quality assurance is a real issue about, and also to ensure that we do have a currency that there are reliable competency-based qualifications. Qualifications that don't tell us, what we have learned in content, but they are good signals of what people can actually do. Career guidance. Now, telling young people more of the truth is really, really important. And doing this early on. I show you sort of a picture about 15-year-olds. We asked them about their career expectation at the age of 15 in the PISA study. And one of the things that we see is that young people who have higher career expectations, who have a broader view of the world, who know more of the opportunities in the future, are much more likely to end up in a skilled occupation. And I know now you're going to tell me, well, that's obvious because, those people have higher expectations because they have better skills, have more wealthy homes, and so on. But even when you discount for all of this, actually, the ideas that young people have about their future early on remains a very, very strong predictor for what they do. So bringing the world of work much earlier into the world of learning is really, really important to give particularly disadvantaged children a good picture of this. Now, creating a coherent guidance profession, ensuring that guidance is adequately supported. And actually, at the age of 16 or 18, it's very, very late in the stage of people's lives. Now, those things really need to happen very, very early on. I'm not going to talk about the need to extract good value from skills. That's actually one of the things where I believe the UK is quite good. Your employers actually quite good in figuring out what skills people have, irrespective of their degrees and qualifications. You could see that in the chart. I want to just sum up how important it is to build all of this into coherent skill systems. These things are all easy to talk about, but really, really hard to do in practice now, because our systems are all poorly aligned. Now, there's a higher education world, an FE world, continual learning, work-based learning, and those things here in the UK are not very well integrated. Now, it's not Switzerland, where you can see all of these pathways somehow seamlessly work together, or the Netherlands or Germany, but I think there are a lot of challenges for making this work. But if you do want to make it work, it's about starting very, very early. Young people's beliefs, young people's capacities in schooling are a crucial determinant for their future success. It's about making learning everybody's business. Giving people much more discretion over how they learn, where they learn, when they learn, bringing employers on board, government, people on this. And then again, we used to learn to do the work. Now learning is the work for us every day. That's the test of truth for anyone in any situations. And that means we need to adapt learning to the lives of people rather than trying to put people into educational institutions. Now, making learning provision much more flexible, much more responsive to the needs of people. Also, being better in identifying those who need the learning most. That's really hard because as institutions, we are naturally inclined to sort of serve those who are best prepared, who have survived the kind of schooling system, but actually the rate of return is highest for those who need that most. Improving transparency, giving people a good signal of the truth is important. And the last point is really about guidance. It is a tough agenda. Now, I don't think there's any question about it that this is really, really hard. But that's what the future really requires of us. And I do think you as FE colleges are the right starting point for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas. I mean, there's so much there that will resonate so well with this audience, the sense of how important the work is that they're doing. But how can you make the people, like the politicians or whatever, listen to how important it is globally and how important it is for business and things, because that's what the big struggle is.
Yeah, you know, I think actually most politicians do understand this agenda quite well. They work in an environment where you have a very strong lobby that is very much dominated by traditional providers. I think that's true not just in the UK, but everywhere. I think in a way your system is heavily biased towards those institutions. Now, most people who run your country come from those kinds of institutions.
Yeah.
So, but I think sort of the agenda is understood. I also think it's not just about government. It's also about helping people to understand that they need to invest in a lifelong, life-wide learning, that it's actually less and less useful to stack up qualifications at the beginning, that actually this idea of, and I think that's the hard part. You can solve the provision, the supply of learning, shaping the demand for learning and giving people the signals through qualification systems that are much more granular. The first thing employers, I mean, you can put more money into institutions, but the first thing actually to do is making the qualification systems much more granular.
So in other words, the more people actually go and use the further education system, then that will dictate where it goes.
I do believe so. I think also ensuring that the quality of provision is really, really good and making it an attractive first choice of people, I think is very important.
But which other countries do you think we could learn from here?
Well, if you look at the countries doing their best, the Nordic countries in Europe, Sweden, Finland, are doing really well in integrating the world of work and learning. Basically, employers are willing to give you time, governments are making the necessary investments, and people somehow see this as a way to progress beyond their current job. There's a lot of investment in the next job, not just in the current job, like here in the UK. So I think that you can learn from there. I think when you look at the integration of work, the work-based learning part, Switzerland, Germany, Austria are very good at it. Denmark has become very good at this. Singapore has become very good at this. It's also important because many people say these are countries that had a long tradition of doing this, but there are actually some new emerging countries that have become very good.
And do they have a completely different frame of mind about FE?
Yeah, I think there are two things that are different. First of all, governments see this as a first choice for people. They're making this a very prestigious choice. In fact, in my country, in Germany, the majority of young people goes to those kinds of colleges as opposed to university. Despite the fact that university is free, they actually pay you for going to university. Still, most people think that's the right pathway for me. I also think employers are really willing to invest in the work-based part, and I do believe it's a crucial part of learning. FE learning doesn't work when you don't have also a counterpart at the workplace, now where basically there is high quality provision, where you have people in the workplace who are well trained in pedagogy, and when you have people in the FE college who have up-to-date skills, who are actually also, this is I think a big part that you face here is that when you look at the pay, it pays you better to be a plumber as a plumber than to be a plumber in an FE college. And that, I think, is a real problem. You want to have the best people in your colleges now.
Yeah, which is tricky when the funding's so tough. Andreas, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate that. Put your hands together for Andreas Schleicher.
Thank you.
Thank you.